Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review absolutely anything. Yeah, I didn't realize. Yeah, I'm just gonna review it all. I'm gonna review every single movie and every single show right now. I'm like, bah! And I reviewed it. I've done it. Now, because it feels like at some points and sometimes I have gone on and like, man, he's just reviewed everything at this point. Like, man, like these are some poor choices. These some like, but hey, like when also finding certain movies, really when it comes down to it, like it's just kind of finally just saying like, hey, like I had fun watching this movie. I had my own wish fulfillment. If really that's what I'm really doing here, and like I really wanted to start watching some Simon Pegg films, and like this one was kind of one that just kind of immediately popped up conveniently on Tubi. And so I otherwise decided I'm like, okay, let's kind of like let's start into this, and eventually I'll get into like the Shaun of the Deads and like all the really interesting like Simon Pegg films that everybody loves, and so on and so forth. So absolutely anything. What is this movie about? Well, speaking of like wish fulfillment, like if anybody is to go on and watch movies like Bruce Almighty, or is to probably see a horror film called Wishmaster at some point, or is to probably even see like the Adam Sandler movie Click, where of course we have Adam Sandler that is kind of getting some kind of wish fulfillment a little bit here and there by having him at some points possibly being able to like slow down that jogger, or being able to become more tan, or like change his skin to green so he can look like the Hulk, like and all that kind of like fun kind of thing that goes on with that story. But yeah, so I have fun with this film. It's a funny, goofy film, and of course we have Robin Williams voicing Dennis the dog. I love you, Neil. So so here is the teeing up. Here is the concept of this movie. So we have a bunch of aliens that decide via some probe that enters the orbit of their ship. They go on and they decide like, well, hey, like Earth's a new planet. Let's go and give one of their Earthlings the ability to do whatever they want, like no holds barred, like free will doesn't matter, nothing matters, like it's whatever the person wants, and we'll see if that person is to turn to absolute good or absolute evil, and if this person is to do neither, then they might as well just blow up the earth because like it's an undeciding thing. So we also have it where luckily these aliens at first are to like start talking in their alien language, but then once they go onto Earth, they start speaking English because they're trying to learn the language of the planet, and so there's a convenient way to just write in English, and so on and so forth. So when when going into this movie, it's just a goofy concept that you just kind of have fun with, and then all of a sudden there's like villain sides of things, and but really there's just kind of this like fun story that, of course, to be kind of put together where. Like we always have like a lot of Simon Neill kind of movies is like the guy trying to get the girl or woo her or win her over. But yeah, so like, but most of this is just kind of a wish fulfillment kind of film. Um, uh, and so, with that said, let's go out of our way to just kind of double five this up. Go into spoilers. Hopefully, I can be able to kind of like say what all happens within this film, because there's just a lot of stuff that kind of just gets trickled out through this film. And more than likely, I might go on in spoilers and just kind of in a roundabout way, like kind of mention what all happens in this film and kind of get to certain bigger parts of this movie. Uh, But anyways, with that said, I think it's about that time yet again to go into spoilers, and let's go into absolutely anything. Let's go into that double five time territory. Let's just go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we get to spoil this movie. So we have Neil, who is to have gained the power of absolute everything, and he has to go and just kind of wave his hand a certain way for him to be able to do whatever he freaking wants. So, in the very beginning of this movie, have a crow. We of course have an alien uh, who is to come into contact with a probe, because of course NASA or uh, whichever space station is to go on and send a rocket out that is to send this probe out. And so these aliens upon this alien ship are to get a hold of this probe. And so like, like these people come in peace. So these guys decide to choose one human from Earth to get this absolutely anything power, and so they kind of pick at random. And it seems that there's a number of celebrities that are all kind of getting this power, like they might have this power. Justin Bieber, Sarah Palin, so and so forth. And so Neil's character ends up getting this power, and so Neil, of course, who is to go on and be talking to a girl named Catherine, who's being played by Kate Beckinsale. We have Neil going and talking to Catherine about his book and how it seems uh, like he is to kind of throw out chapters, because of course uh, like the pages are just flowing so much so that I guess chapters are just a burden for Neil to really have at this point. So, but before that, we have Neil kind of waking up for his day. Of course, getting Dennis kind of what he is to need, and so all of a sudden, Dennis is barking uh, at this doorbell ringing with Fiona, and so Neil is to go and answer the door, and Fiona is frustrated because she is to hear this dog barking. And we have Neil who tells Fiona, it's like, well, the dog is only barking because you had rang this doorbell. And Fiona's just like, well, no, the dog was barking, and so I rang this doorbell. And so we have Neil that's complaining to Fiona because she's like, you know what? He's like, you know what? You live 3 floors, from my place. What is your complaint? And so this girl just wants something to complain about. And so she's here with Neil. So Neil goes on and is to talk to Catherine and to, of course, talk about his book that he is not writing. And so Neil goes onto his bike to make his way to, of course, his teaching job, which, of course, he really just loathes and hates because, of course, he has a headmaster that is to give him crap, and he is teaching a school or teaching a class that is very rebellious and kind of all creating so much chaos by the time that Neil is to arrive. So we go on and we have Neil who is having lunch with his friend Ryan, uh, Ray. And so at one point we have Neil talking to Ray, and so Ray is to say, it's like, man, what would you do if you had the power to do absolutely anything that you wanted? And Ray is to be consistently infatuated with this one other uh, I think gym teacher. And so Neil is kind of telling Ray, it's like, well, hey, that seems kind of like outlandish for you to want to go on, and because Ray wants this girl to like worship the feet that this guy walks on, and Neil's like, come on, like no, like so. Neil kind of makes the joke that he would probably blow up Tennessee, or that he would go on and kind of do these other kind of like goofy things, like have Dennis go and uh, vomit up his notes from chapter 3 of his book. But then he's also just like, well, but I'd want my pages to be like perfectly done, and that would be the thing that I want. So all of a sudden we have Neil that is getting every single one of the things that he just said granted, and then he goes onto the news and is to realize that like Tennessee is like destroyed, and he's like, oh my god. So and so we start to have Neil that's realizing that some of the stuff that he is to do is coincidentally coming true. And so Neil goes on and is to drink this thing of alcohol, because he's just like, it's just shock. It's just me just trying. It's just me realizing that all this stuff is happening, because we have Neil that is to kind of wish that that Dennis's poop is to clean itself, and so all of a sudden his like poop is starting to walk, and is to just jump into this toilet and flush. And I'm like, what the is this? Like immediately the first time that I watched this movie, I'm like, this movie's so weird, but I love it. And so after seeing that, and after seeing that all play out, we of course have Neil who's in shock, and so he's telling the alcohol to go uh, back into the bottle after he is to pour it out, and so Neil is going and telling the alcohol to exchange itself, and so the alcohol is going and opening up this door and is walking all the way down to the store, and is realizing that the store is closed, and so the alcohol is not going to wait till the store reopens, and the alcohol just breaks through the door. And so all of a sudden Neil is like, oh my god, I need to run out of here. All of a sudden we have one policeman that is to go and tackle Neil to the ground, and so Neil goes on and wishes that he was back home. And so we have Neil that's just like, oh my god, like these powers are just crazy. And so we consistently have it where like Neil is just trying to play around with these powers, but he's realizing that he has to be way more specific, or otherwise things are just going to horribly backfire, especially when he's not specific enough. So Neil goes on and at one point is to realize that people at Tennessee are still dead. And so now Neil kind of wishes for everyone who is dead to now be alive. And so all of a sudden, like, all these zombies are coming back, like coming back from the dead. And Neil is like, oh my god, I didn't want every single person to have all come back from the dead. No, 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 no. Like, just everyone from Tennessee who had died is now alive now. And anybody who had gotten injured from the whole thing that happened in Tennessee is now okay. So basically, we just get to the point where Neil goes all the way back to that moment with Ray where he had even started talking about any of this stuff, and he realized, like, oh, like, so Neil is to just have this, like, weirdest, like, thought, and so but Neil realizes he still has this power. So Neil goes on and eventually is to grant Ray's wish at one point for, of course, this gym teacher to worship him, because, of course, Ray is just kind of getting ignored by this one gym teacher, and this gym teacher is kind of falling for this other teacher. So Neil is just like, well, this teacher now worships Ray. And so all of a sudden we get to an absurd degree where this girl is worshiping Ray so much so that she is to say that Ray is immortal, and they want to test that fact to have him be noosed or to be like killed to try to prove that he is, of course, to not be immortal or not. So we kind of just have Ray, who's consistently hiding out from his worshippers, because it just goes on to have just the one girl worship him, to all of a sudden there's a plethora of people that are all of a sudden weirdly just worshiping Ray for some weird, goofy reason. So we have Neil that is to wake up the next day, and he all of a sudden is to just want to see Catherine, and so he just kind of wishes that. And so all of a sudden, we have Neil, whose floor is now to be see through. And so now Neil is seeing Catherine, like ironing a shirt of hers. And so Neil's like, oh my God, I'm seeing Catherine. And all of a sudden Catherine's like, oh my God, ah! And so Neil is kind of like, is wishing, like, yeah, I wish that my floor would go back to the way it was. And then all of a sudden, like, Catherine is still freaking out from what had just happened. And so Neil's like, make Catherine just forget what just happened. And I'm just like, this guy is just gonna F so much stuff up. But thinking about it, you could have Neil be effing anybody in the world, and then all of a sudden he can just turn around and just say it like, hey, make this person I just slept with, like, forget what all had just happened. And that would be amazing. So he would have the memory, but she wouldn't, or whoever wouldn't. But probably at some point they'd probably find out, like, oh yeah, like, why are you 8 months pregnant or something? Or why are you X amount of months pregnant? So, but like, that's kind of the funny thing about it all. So anyways, so we have a guy that shows up at Catherine's place, who of course is called Grant. Grant, of course, the funny thing about Rob Riggle, Rob actually, like, the funny thing about this guy is he's kind of this, like, he's wearing all this kind of, this military-ish, like, outfit, and Rob actually is a Army Reserve general. And so, like, Rob actually is in the military, and so it's kind of interesting to see that, like, Rob is actually wearing this, like, military outfit. And so we have Grant that just appears at Catherine's place because he had technically broke in. And so Catherine is telling Grant, she's trying to, like, put him down to just say, like, hey, like, I want nothing to do with you. And, like, Grant is just like, well, I beg to differ. Like, I think that you definitely want me. And so, or no, wait, like, Grant shows up at Catherine's work. There we go. But he also is to, like, basically try to continue to break into her place later on, and is to, like, continue to try and get to her wherever she is at. So, and Catherine has her boss that is to kind of step up for her and is to try to, like, scare Grant away. And I guess since Catherine is working for BBC, uh, Grant is to mention it's like, well, like, I coincidentally have a friend who had worked for the BBC, and like he used to do it just for fun, like as if like this thing was like nothing to him. So his friend. So we go on and we have Catherine telling her boss that she needed Grant for some research and for some documentary, and like she was drunk also at some party and had gotten with Grant, and it was the biggest mistake of her life. So Neil goes on and is to continue to use these powers. And so Neil is going on and wanting to be behind this mirror and want to like change his physique to be the perfect body, which of course is a female body. And he's like, no, like I want the perfect like male body. And all of a sudden he turns into Einstein. And Neil's like, no, I want the perfect male like, and so like he turns into this man that's like six packs abs and whatever. And so Neil's like, oh, okay, all right. So like we also had Neil that wanted a big twig and berries also, and he's like, hey, I want a really big twig and berries. And then it goes on to be like way abnormally big, and then he's like, no, 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 like put it back to normal. But then like he wishes to have like it to be like the perfect like female pleasing size, and then all of a sudden he realizes that it's not the right color, and he's like, well, like, but white though. So Neil goes on, and so and it kind of feels weirdly like this is like the movie Bedazzled a little bit, the Brendan Fraser movie Bedazzled, where of course like Brendan Fraser is trying to win over this woman, and so he wishes to be this certain kind of man, this like intelligent man or like athletic man, and every single wish that he tries to do realizes that it doesn't work out to win this girl over, and then Brendan's character starts to realize that it's like, well, like you want me to fail at every single one of these wishes so you can collect my soul without me being happy. And the girl's like, no, 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 like that's not it at all. But it really, that's what kind of happens. So Neil goes on and is to eventually at some point uh, like Catherine um, ask Catherine out, because Catherine is to go on and consistently talk to her friend, and her friend is telling Catherine, it's like, well, hey, like, if you kind of like are having, if you kind of fancy this guy Neil, like, why don't you just go on and just, like, date him, or why don't you just go on and just one night just like kind of bang him, and why not? And Catherine is kind of feeling a little tipsy one night, and she's like, well, like maybe I should. And so all of a sudden, Catherine decides that she's going to go and have one night of passionate lovemaking with Neil. And so all of a sudden, the very next day, Neil is to think that he wished that that Catherine was to be in love with him, and all of a sudden there is to be one point in time where all of a sudden the aliens were to not have the absolute anything power bestowed upon Neil, and that was just some happy accident. And then they put the power back into Neil, and so Neil is all of a sudden talking to Catherine about last night, and Neil had gone on to use his powers to make his dog finally talk so he can know exactly what his dog wants. And so all of a sudden, Dennis is now talking like Robin Williams, weirdly. And so we have it where all of a sudden Neil is putting Dennis in the bathroom, and so all of a sudden Catherine comes on by and she's like, "Hey, like about last night." And all of a sudden we have Dennis who's like, "I love you, Neil. Tell me you love me, Neil." And Dennis is like, "Oh, that's my plumber." Like he's very affectionate. And yeah, my plumber just so happens to be my brother. And yeah, that's why I like it. And so Catherine's friend is already telling her that it's possible that Neil might be gay, and so this can kind of confirm it. And so, considering Neil can't go on and tell Catherine that he's allowed his dog to talk, and so Neil is just like kind of figuring out a way to talk to Dennis, and we end up finding out that belly scratching is not actually a thing that dogs actually like. It's just a thing that they like a lot of the pets put on to make it think that the owner is doing like a really good thing. So we have Neil running after Catherine. I'm like, you know what? Neil could go on and like kind of redo that whole scene all over again before she comes in, and Neil could kind of make Dennis like just go right back to him like not talking again, and Catherine can come in. Like Neil could have replayed that whole entire day over again if he has the anything power, but he didn't do that because I guess he didn't realize what he could do really. So Neil is just kind of running off and wanting to like figure out a way to win Catherine back over, but it seems that Catherine is running off, and so kind of Neil is kind of chasing after her, and so Neil is going on and like using his wave power to say it's like, well, hey, like I want to be on this bus, and then so he's like right on top of the bus, and he's like, no, I want to be inside the bus, and then all of a sudden he's like in the engine part of the bus, and he's like, no, I want to be in the part where all the other passengers are. And so he arrives there, and he's like kind of black and sooted and whatever. And so all of a sudden, Neil is trying to run after Catherine. All of a sudden, Ray is to just run into Neil. And he's like, oh my God, uh, like I have worshippers now, and they're wanting to all try and kill me. So Neil goes on and turns Ray into this duck, and then he, instead of that, turns him into a sausage, and then he's like taking this sausage and he's walking around with it, and all of a sudden Ray's worshippers are like, hey, where is he? And so they kind of just all walk off. So Neil goes and talks to Catherine, and all of a sudden the exact same sausage that Ray is to be turned into is the exact same sausage that's at this like little place that they're in, and the person behind the counter is thinking that Neil is trying to steal off with this sausage, but he's going to give her money to just kind of make her go away. So Neil is trying to talk to Catherine, and of course, Catherine wants nothing to do with Neil. And so Neil just kind of goes on to realize that he almost ate Ray at some point, and so Neil turns Ray back to Ray. So Neil is starting to realize that he will possibly never win over Catherine. And even with all the powers that, of course, he is to have, like he wants to go on and win over Catherine the right way. He doesn't want to go on and use his power to kind of fake win this girl over. And because so like Neil goes on and he is to at some point go on a date with Catherine and produce the best soup that Catherine has ever tasted, and Catherine is to really like what Neil's doing. And so but then again, like she starts to eventually realize that Neil has this power because Neil explains this to Catherine that he is to have this power, and so Neil finally goes and takes Catherine and explains to her that Dennis is actually not a person, it's a dog, and that Neil explains to Catherine that he has the ability to do whatever he wants. And so Neil is telling Catherine, it's like, well, hey, you want a job with a bigger desk? Wham. You want a job with a perfect view? Wham. And so all of a sudden, Catherine, the very next day, is to go on and realize that yes, she does have a bigger desk and she does have like the perfect Grand Canyon like view. And so Catherine is just like, okay, like this really doesn't make sense. So, like, what Neil is telling me, like, has to be true. So, you would think at this point, like, Neil would kind of go on and do almost like the Bruce Mighty kind of thing. If Neil is to kind of see certain people and just like, hey, like my so and so sports team is not doing that great. Like make it so that they're all of a sudden world champions and this and that. Like kind of like in Bruce Almighty, where all of a sudden like the hockey team is to all of a sudden be at like the Stanley Cup and like everything's going great and so on and so forth because they pray a lot. So, or the coach prays a lot. So we have Neil all of a sudden have uh, Grant kind of break in uh, to Neil's place because all of a sudden, like, Grant is to break into Catherine's place, and so Neil is telling Catherine, like, "Hey, how about you just come to my place, and you'll be safe." And so all of a sudden, Grant is to break into this guy's window, and so Neil starts going on and kind of chucking Grant all over the place and smacking him against this wall and smacking him against the ceiling and so on and so forth, to where uh, Neil is saying that Grant, or Grant, by the way of which that Neil pronounces it, Neil goes on and is telling, like, if Grant goes and tries to, push me anywhere to break his hand, and so all of a sudden Grant's hand is broken. And so Grant is like, how are you doing all these things? And Neil's like, well, I just have the power to just magically wave my hand. And of course, have you be able to do, or have me be able to do whatever I want. And so Neil is saying, like, well, hey, Grant, like, I can go and give you $1 million, or I can go on and make it all disappear. And, like, so really, like, you should go and go away. Or I can just, like, I can hurt you. I can make your life miserable. And so Grant is like, well, like since this guy has this ability, like I want to go on and figure out how I can use this to my benefit. So Grant decides to go on and figure out a way to get to Neil. And so all of a sudden, Neil is now tied up, and Grant has this like weird pulley system to make Neil like weirdly wave his hand. And so Grant is having a gun on Neil's dog Dennis, and Grant is telling Neil to do every single thing that Grant is to have listed upon this list. And so Neil goes on and is to rattle off all the things off this list. Neil mentions that um, all British men are to have big ears and webbed feet, so everybody weirdly looks like a duck. feet down. And so Grant wants Neil to have all police officers wear pink uniforms, and so Neil does so. Uh, Grant want like so we go on and Grant is to do all these goofy, bizarre-ish wishes to the point where all of a sudden Neil is to have this hot fudge sundae like head and like is wearing a dress and like is all like we have Neil who's doing all of these goofy things that make no sense. And Grant is going and having like tons and tons of gold for whatever goofy reason, and Grant's like having this like uh, this military suit filled with all these awards and so on and so forth. So like, and then also speaking of which, like Neil at some point was wishing to be the president of the United States, and so weirdly, Neil is getting picked up by these Secret Service men, and so all of a sudden, weirdly, like Neil is getting like shot at for whatever goofy reason. I don't know why Neil, who is supposedly the president of the United States, is just weirdly getting shot at this point. But I guess it is what it is. So also we have these Secret Service guys in this limo who are giving Neil like all of these like these secrets and all of these like things that Neil is gonna have to deal with. And so with all these kind of things that he's getting flung at him, all these files, like Neil just kind of tosses him into the and tosses all this into the ground, and so Neil goes on and wishes for him to be back at home, and you would think that Neil would all of a sudden appear in the White House, but but he ends up kind of wishing that all away. Neil at some point eventually realizes that he can kind of start to undo these wishes because he doesn't know the exact wordages of it all. But then he starts to reverse the wishes if he makes mistakes. So Neil goes on, and Catherine is trying to break into Neil's place. And so once Catherine breaks in with Ryan at her side, we now have Grant that is telling Neil to do the last wish thing. And that is that, of course, Catherine is to fall madly in love with Grant. And so all of a sudden, Catherine does do so and is jumping on top of Grant and wanting to just make love with the man. And so all of a sudden, Neil is taking this advantage to like free Dennis from his rope, and to free also Neil from his being tied up. And so all of a sudden, Neil changes Grant into another dog, and so all of a sudden, like weirdly, Catherine is like kissing a dog, and so Neil is telling Catherine, it's like, well, hey, like, be your normal self, and so Catherine has realized that all of this that Neil has done is all true, and so it gets to the point where Catherine no longer wants to be have anything to do with Neil because she's questioning whether or not like Neil was to do all this forcibly, um, or was this all just a weird coincidence that Catherine was to really like Neil or live underneath him or whichever, or was that some just kind of weird wish that Neil had at some point? And so all of a sudden the aliens are kind of gearing up for destroying planet Earth. And because Neil had also tried to want to create the perfect world, and so he starts wishing for world peace. He starts wishing uh, for like world hunger to just kind of go away, and for everybody to have like as much food as they equally need. And I think he also like says global warming to just kind of to also like correct that problem. And so all of a sudden we start to find out that Neil trying to do the best for his planet all of a sudden is to do the opposite effect, and all of a sudden like war is being created like everywhere, and Neil is to realize like people have become massively too fat, and that all of a sudden there is no uh, stretch of land that isn't being filled by numerous houses over and over and over and over again. And so also like uh, Earth has turned into this like this snowy wintered environment that is to go into an ice age because global warming is basically like has been killed. So Neil was just like, well, just do everything, just undo everything that I just said. It's just like, yeah. So Neil goes on and he's like, man, even if I try to like create like the perfect world, like there's always going to be a side effect to some kind of good thing that I'm trying to do for Earth or just mankind. So like that's when like I would just have Neil just kind of wish for a like global warming expert or an expert on all the stuff that he is to have tried to wish for, and figured out like the perfect breakdown of how to have a perfect wish uh, go forward to where he is to do like, oh, instead of just kind of obliterating completely global warming, just kind of figure out like the perfect uh, like right way of approaching it. So we go on and we have Neil, who is to realize that things aren't going to work well with Catherine, and so Neil at one point is to go on and jump off this bridge because things aren't going right. So Neil goes and jumps off this bridge, and all of a sudden Dennis is to jump off this bridge after him. And then weirdly, we have it where Dennis is say that he can't really swim, even though he can. And so both Neil and both Dennis are making it off to the shore, and we're having Neil and Dennis kind of come up with this conundrum of like, well, what can I do to just win Catherine over? And really just comes down to um, since Neil has his power and Catherine doesn't like her knowing that Neil has his power, Neil decides to just give up this power and give it to Dennis, the dog. And so Dennis is telling Neil, it's like, well, hey, like, I'll do anything that you want me to do. So even if I have this power, like, I'll kind of use it to kind of help you and help whatever you need and whatever you want. So Neil is just like, oh, okay, well, that's a cool thing. So Dennis goes on and he kind of waves with his hand that he wants whatever kind of source of the power that was to give him this ability to have this power is to be no more, is basically destroyed. And that destroys every single alien that, of course, was to try and destroy the Earth. So, really, that just kind of solves everything, and all of a sudden, Neil is going to Catherine and showcasing to her after he's going on and talking to Fiona and kissing her on the lips because he just really hates this person. So Neil goes on and is to talk to Catherine and say like, "Hey, like look at me, I don't have the power anymore," and he starts wishing for things, and Catherine is like, "Oh, so he doesn't have the power," and so Neil goes on. He's like, "Hey, you want some dinner tonight? You want to like just hang out tonight?" And Catherine's like, "Sure." Like tonight is like, "Yeah." We also had the one moment at one point where Neil was going to his class, realizing how much like he was gonna hate working with his class today, and so he just kind of says like, "Can't all these students all just be like these perfect students that are all eager to want to learn and this and that. So all of a sudden he goes in the classroom and they're all like, yeah, like let's go and read this chapter, yeah. And he's like, oh, thank God. And so we had one moment also where Neil was explaining to Ray about his power, and so Ray is making a skeleton talk about his origin, and so all of a sudden, like Ray is to realize, like, oh my God, that this skeleton is seriously talking, and Neil is just like, well, yeah, I can make it jump out a window, and so he goes on and does so. We also had the moment where Neil was talking to the headmaster, or was wanting to avoid the headmaster, and so instead Neil was just wishing that the headmaster would just continue to just treat him nicely. And so the headmaster is going on and kind of telling Neil, it's like, well, hey, like, man, you have a really good like set of clothes yesterday. I think you wore those yesterday, but hey, like, great. Like, and so all of a sudden Neil and Ray are in this room after the skeleton is to fly out of this window. And so the headmaster is to go on and like, hey, like Ray, like, did this skeleton just kind of fly out of your room? And then all of a sudden we have headmaster just kind of looking at Neil and just like, oh, hey, Neil, like, yeah, you know what, like I can cover for you, like take the whole rest of the day off. And Ray is just like, oh my God, like what did you do to him? So so yeah, so I think there is like some other stuff somewhere in there that I had probably forgotten about. Like the moment that Ray was to be confronted with his worshippers, and so Neil goes on and forces the gym teacher to go back to feeling how she was before about Ray, and so this gym teacher storms off. And so the rest of Ray's worshippers, Neil wishes them to just kind of forget about Ray, and then Ray is just kind of disappointed because it's like, oh man, I had so many worshippers. And so Neil is just like, well, I'm sorry. Like, so but I'm sure there's a number of other things that probably happened within this movie that I had completely forgotten about, because there's just a plethora of things that I could just mention of like stuff that just kind of happens in this film. Hopefully, I just in a very weird roundabout way was able to just kind of talk about this movie and review it because I know it's all over the place. Um, but really I knew like this was going to be a very difficult thing to try to like maneuver through because there's just a lot of moving parts within this. There's so many things that of course Neil just kind of wishes about or is to just kind of change or shift or whatever during a part of this film, so it gets really massively confusing. But eventually I just wanted to get to the main parts of this and then just kind of jump around a little bit and just kind of talking about a number of things that just kind of happened during this film. So, with that said, I think that is to really be all I think that I wanted to say about this one. I feel like I'm probably gonna have a number of points that I'm like, oh my God, I forgot about this, I forgot about that, I forgot blah, blah, blah. Like I feel like that's probably going to happen at some point. But I'm like, oh well, like there's a lot of stuff to just digest in here. And so with that said, I think I'm going to just get out of here. Let me know in the comments below if there is something that I possibly did forget, because like really then it could get the chatting going about anything of this movie. Some people might go on and find this movie to be stupid. At the end of the day, I just found this to be like a fun thromp of a film. And so a lot of people would go on to like, well, if I secretly had this power to do anything that I wanted, I would like to do this or I'd like to do that and whatever. It's kind of a fun wish fulfillment movie. And so with that said, I think I'm going to go out of my way to double five this up. And Oh, wait, or double fly this up. We're not getting into spoilers. I already did spoilers. Oh, we had the moment where Neil was having a dream about him finishing this book, and weirdly enough, we had Neil, who is to title this book, uh, like what you see when your eyes are closed. And so Neil is having this dream where all of a sudden Catherine is giving him some award for this book that he had gone on and successfully did well. And so all of a sudden there, I guess, is to be another guy who is to like have the opposite title. And so who's kind of on TV. And so we had Neil, who goes and talks to Catherine and says, like, hey, I was dreaming about you last night. Give me an award for the book that I perfectly accomplished. And Catherine is like, oh, what book, what chapter are you on? And he's like, well, I've kind of thrown out all the chapters. So, yeah. And I just remember that whole dream sequence because I completely spaced out about it. So, with that said, hopefully ballparkingly something's most of this is all covered because I know there's these little tiny little details that at the end of the day I regretfully say that I probably won't remember them because there's too much to talk about within this movie. Eventually, at some point, I'll probably rewatch this randomly at some point and realize, oh, I forgot about that piece or that part or that whatever. But, anyways, I'm going to just get out of here and feel that my wish is fulfilled of being able to review this movie and be able to be done for the day. So, goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.